Thank you, Jeff. You've provided us with some interesting lessons from other jurisdictions, in particular in the role of storage enabling DERs. So we are going to move on in the agenda. Our next speaker is Christy Walsh, Director of Division of Policy Development in the Office of Energy Policy and Innovation at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Christy's role focuses on issues involving the capacity markets, transmission planning and cost allocation, gas-electric coordination, removing barriers to ensure access to the market and grid by all resources, and coordination between wholesale and retail electric markets. Christy will address the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission's landmark decision in 2018 to remove barriers to the participation of electric storage resources in the capacity, energy, and ancillary service markets operated by regional transmission organizations and independent system operators. Please welcome Christy Walsh.
Good morning. I don't think I've ever been brought on stage by music before, so that's pretty exciting. The first thing I want to say is go Raptors. As an American, congratulations, Canada. I will try to keep my remarks short so people can take advantage of the break to go out and see the parade going on. I want to talk a little bit about what we did with Order 841. I'm not going to bore you with the specifics of the rule, but I was asked to talk more about how we got there. And so first I need to say, let me get to my disclaimer at the bottom. So first, my remarks are my own. They do not reflect the opinion of the Commission, any commissioner, or the United States government. I have to say that every time. So I'm going to talk about how we got to Order 841. I know all of you know who FERC is, so I'm not going to go into very much detail about FERC, but just a high-level overview of where the policy office fits into FERC and how that leads to us doing major policy issues. Then I'll talk about 841, and time permitting, I'll talk a little bit about our DER aggregation proposal. So FERC regulates, and we're an independent agency of the U.S. We regulate the interstate transmission of electricity, natural gas, and oil, and we also do rates, terms, and conditions of wholesale sales. As important as what we do is what we don't do. So we do not regulate the distribution system, and we do not regulate retail sales. FERC tries to be resource neutral. So Jeff talked a little bit about the policy decisions that helped DER proliferate in the 3 jurisdictions he talked about. That is not FERC's job. That tends to fall to the states. If the US Congress ever wanted to do something, they could. But we just try to make sure our markets are not a barrier to whatever decisions other people make. We try to be resource neutral. So what does the policy office do? There are a lot of offices within FERC that focus their days on what people bring to us. People want to change their tariffs, people want to change somebody else's tariff, people say other people aren't following their tariffs. Those tend to be done in groups that focus on a region. So a California filing will come in and a Western region will deal with that. An ISO New England filing will come in and the Eastern region will do that. The policy office gets involved when things are cross-cutting over multiple jurisdictions or deal with something, a major policy issue. But we also, and I like to say, and Sharon, don't tell my colleagues I said this, we get to do the fun stuff. So we get to look at what trends are coming. We do economic analysis, we do quantitative analysis, qualitative analysis on what trends are coming. What does FERC need to look at? Maybe it's not right for decisions now, but something's coming in a few years or maybe even a decade. What do we need to know before we get there? Because as you all know, government doesn't move as fastly as we want it to. And so we need to be ready for whatever's coming and try to remove any barriers we see. And so that's what we did in the storage rulemaking. A lot of things come to us from a commissioner or the chairman. This actually started with a staff member in about roughly 2008, 2009, coming to us and saying, energy storage isn't really here yet, but it's coming. And we need to be ready for that. And I'd like to start looking at some barriers and what that might do for FERC markets. We put together a team. We did a bunch of outreach to storage developers, to utilities, state regulators, some DOE, Department of energy experts, and energy storage manufacturers to say, what do you see? What is coming? What will this technology do for the grid as a whole? And how are our markets interacting with that? Based on that, staff came up with some thoughts about potential barriers that might come up. One was interconnection. How does interconnection work? The widely recognized barrier at the time was system costs, which Jeff talked about a little bit. Talk about kind of performance requirements and market rules that were set for traditional types of resources that may or may not work for storage. And so in 2010, we started addressing some of these barriers with a few rules that weren't storage specific. They were very much more, we're seeing things that can do things more quickly, storage, DERs, demand response, things like that. What do we need to look at? And so none of these that I'm going to talk about now was a storage rule. The first was a frequency regulation compensation. Basically that put into place where you could get compensated if you could move more quickly. That inherently helps storage, but again, not a storage rule. There was a rule on provision of ancillary services, made it easier to get market-based rates, which makes it easier to participate in the markets, and also said that when you're calculating the reserve requirement, you need to take in speed and accuracy into account, which again inherently helps storage, but really is more of grid services where being able to move faster, you should value that. We also took a look at our small generator interconnection policies. This is a bigger effort about small generators under 20 megawatts, but we specifically said that storage can be a small generator. We also specifically said that storage can take advantage of some of our faster interconnection processes. And then finally, we issued Order 1000, which talked about non-transmission alternatives and transmission planning regions considering those alternatives, such as a storage that can take the place of a transmission upgrade. So once we did all of that, in 2015, our then chairman, Norman Bay, started thinking, okay, well, what do we need to do with respect to barriers for storage in specific? In that November, we had a panel of industry experts come and speak to our commission at our commission meeting. They outlined a lot of things they saw as potential barriers, which frankly tracked what our staff had been saying. Market rules for storage resources may not work. Interconnection rules may not work. What do we do about dual use? One of the things we continually hear is that storage is economic when you can take full advantage of it, but FERC has rules that says, if you're transmission, you fit into this category, and if you're generation, you fit into this category. And storage can often provide multiple types of services. And so it would come in and say, well, I'm not exactly transmission, but I do that thing. And I'm not exactly generation, but I do this too. How do I do both? Talked about frequency regulation compensation and certain other things. So then after that, we said, okay, we need to get more specific. And we had a technical conference with our staff on this dual use proposition. Under FERC regulation, transmission is cost-based. If you provide a transmission service, you get cost-based compensation. But energy ancillary services and capacity is market-based. And so how do you deal with the fact that you've got these two paradigms that storage can fit into and making sure there's no competition issues, there's no cross-subsidization, there is a group of customers who are paying for that transmission facility. And then you get the market-based revenues, and if you're providing those market-based services, how do you make sure that transmission customers who are paying for that aren't subsidizing the market-based services? We talked a lot about different models for doing that. We had a lot of different opinions. And so after that, we issued in 2017 a policy statement. It was based off two previous orders saying this is how you can provide both services. A, that we clarified you can provide both types of services. And B, here are the things you need to take into consideration. We tried not to be prescriptive. We basically said you can do some kind of crediting so that your cost-based customers get credited back what you're earning on the market side. But there are multiple ways to deal with this. It hasn't been used as much as we would have thought, and I think we have a currently pending application under this. It hasn't been as effective as we like, and I suspect we will be looking at why that is sometime, but don't quote me on that. So after that, we started tackling the big question. How does storage participate in wholesale markets? And to be clear, the U.S., about 2/3 of the customers in the United States are served by an RTO or ISO. It generally excludes customers in the southeastern United States and much of the West other than California. So we're only talking about the organized wholesale markets here. And so in 2016, we issued a proposal to remove barriers to participation of storage in wholesale markets. Basically what we found was, and this is based off staff research and the panel and the technical conference, is that DER and storage capabilities are improving. Many of the wholesale tariffs were designed for traditional resources. And so some of the rules just inadvertently didn't really take into account how storage could participate. And that we found, and this is an important part of our jurisdictional hook, is that integration of the resources would enhance competition and help ensure just and reasonable rates. And so what we did was we issued data requests to, I think I'm a slide too far. We issued data requests to each RTO and ISO asking them, what are your rules? How is storage participating? Are there any barriers? And then we asked the general public to come in and say, what do you see as the barriers? How do you see storage participating? What do you think of the ISOs and RTOs' answers? And based off of those comments, which were pretty hefty, we issued a rule that did, at a very high level, two things, or we issued a proposal that proposed to do two things. The first is establish a participation model that has market rules that, considering the physical and operational characteristics of storage, accommodates their participation in the wholesale markets. And the second, which I will talk about at the end if there's time, would allow DER aggregations to participate in the wholesale markets. So we received, again, a lot of comments on that proposal. And in 2018, we issued a final rule on the storage proportion of that proposal. And essentially, we said each RTO and ISO needs a participation model that ensures that storage resources over 100 kilowatts can participate in the markets, that they can provide any energy, capacity, or ancillary service that they are capable of providing, that the RTO and ISO tariffs count for physical and operational characteristics of storage. There was a lot of very detailed things in the rule about bidding parameters and how they participate. That the RTO and ISO allows them to be dispatched and to set the wholesale price as load and as a seller and a buyer. And then that any power they buy from the wholesale market that they sell back to the wholesale market is at the LMP. And that's an issue with respect to our resale and wholesale jurisdiction. One major issue, and again, this is because of our interesting jurisdictional issues with the states, that we dealt with both in the rule, and it was a major issue on rehearing of the rule, which we issued an order on last month, was the jurisdiction. Essentially, we said any storage resource that met our definition, again, 100 kilowatts or above, can participate in the wholesale markets. And it didn't matter if that storage resource was connected at transmission or distribution or behind the meter. We got fairly strong comments saying, wait a minute, you don't have jurisdiction over distribution systems, and you definitely don't have jurisdiction over behind the meter, so those resources shouldn't be implicated in this rule. And essentially what we said was, we disagree with you. All we're doing is saying that setting our market rules, and FERC has exclusive jurisdiction over our market rules. So we're saying these folks can participate in our markets. We're not saying how they participate at retail. We're not saying if they participate at retail. But if they're able to, they can participate in our markets. One of the things we said on rehearing was a state can't say, just blanket, nobody in our state can participate at wholesale. They could set up retail rules that said, if you want to participate in our retail programs, you have to forego the wholesale market revenues, because that is about what the retail rules are. And so we'll have to see how the states implement that. So far, we haven't heard much, but we are pretty early in the rule. The implementation plans, what FERC calls compliance filings, are due in December. As everybody knows, the devil's in the details. Implementation is always complicated, and so we issued some data requests to the RTOs and ISOs to give us more information about their implementation plans. We're still reviewing those, and hope to resolve these issues going forward. And then the RTOs and ISOs will have to comply and actually implement those. It was 365 days after the compliance filings were due. I think several have asked for extensions on that, and the Commission will still have to rule on that. So the other portion of our rule was DER aggregations. This was a little bit more complicated, and so it was distributed energy aggregations up to 100 kilowatts could participate in our markets. What we heard in the comments were that this is more complicated than storage. These are small resources. They often are, just diffuse. How do you do this? So we decided that we were not going to go forward with that part of the rule at the time that we went forward with storage. Instead, we started a new proceeding to answer some of the thornier questions. One of the things we talked about in the proposal was distributed energy aggregation should be aggregated over as wide of a geographic area as possible. What we heard on comments were some people said, yes, that's absolutely possible, let's go. Other people came in and said, wait, no, that really needs to be a nodal rule. The aggregation needs to come from the nodes so we can model that. We heard coordination is really important, especially as penetration increases. So you need to coordinate with the distribution operator, the DER itself, and the wholesale market operator. We heard the distribution utility is going to have a crucial role in these DER aggregations, and we need to figure out what that is. So what we did was we had a technical conference. We invited a lot of different stakeholders to come talk to staff about some of these implementation rules. We heard a lot about flexibility. We heard a lot about the different types of modeling needed. We heard a lot about visibility. And so we got comments after that last summer. We're still looking at how to deal with those issues. They're quite complicated. They have jurisdictional intricacies that is slightly different than storage, and so we are still considering how to move forward on that rule. And I think I am going very quickly, but that's really all I had, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you. David Katz, I'm on the Etno Corporate Partners Committee. When we have generation, we have them prove they have a 15-year supply of fuel, etc. If we are counting on these lithium-ion batteries or other technologies, as you said, it's 100 kilowatts or could participate, but what are the rules about their reliability that being connected to the grid are being asked?
So right now, going back to the fuel security of a traditional generator, we don't have that type of rule. Different regions are looking at whether to value kind of having that type of fuel on site. So we don't have that analogy.
And I'm using the analogy. They claim, this lithium-ion battery will last, 10,000 cycles or 20 years. That's just theoretical.
Yeah.
And so we're betting on them just like we're betting on generators. So did your study look at the supply chain for lithium and how quickly batteries will be able to be the size behind the grid?
So we didn't look at supply chain, and in our markets, for the capacity, it's usually a 1-year forward capacity in those markets that have capacity markets. NISO is only 6 months, and some of the RTOs don't have capacity markets. So really, you're only bidding in for that year. So we just don't have the issue of looking forward and making sure that battery is viable for that long. It's really a business decision of the battery itself.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning. My name is Patrick Brown. I represent Hydro Ottawa, one of the local distribution companies here in Ontario. You spoke a lot about the journey that FERC undertook in engaging with stakeholders on the topic of storage. And I'm just curious to get your view on where you think you ended up, just in terms of the benefit of hindsight, looking at how you structured that conversation. And is it your sense that, or engaging the mood from stakeholders, do you think that you guys arrived at a good place in terms of not everyone getting what they want, but generally recognizing that the process was sound? So that's one question. The second question is just kind of the general perspective or posture from FERC when you're undertaking a consultation of this nature. What do you guys do to make sure that you're striking a balance in terms of being that place where you're facilitating the dialogue, but not dictating or driving too much of it, and making sure like stakeholders feel like they're being heard, and then with everyone recognizing at the end of the day that ultimately you as the regulator have to make a decision, you have to get off the fence on one side or another. So just kind of general themes or takeaways or perhaps lessons for us having undertaken this very significant consultation, where you guys landed, and if you feel like you can pat yourself on the back for best practices that you guys put in place. Be interested to hear any thoughts in that regard.
Okay, thanks. Since we issued the rehearing order a month ago affirming the rule, I feel like we did end up in a good place. I'm not going to say that FERC has best practices. I think we did pretty well, particularly in this rule. As I said, we started talking to stakeholders about storage in 2008, 2009. We had multiple technical conferences along the way. I am sure some stakeholders feel like it wasn't enough. Especially on the issue of letting storage in that's at distribution level. That said, I think especially with this, having the stakeholder conversations was important. I would love to be able to tell you today that we went forward with both storage and DER, but I think FERC recognized that we didn't have enough information on DERs, and it was important to go back out and have more stakeholder conversations, have a technical conference. Luckily, under our rules, we're allowed to have conversations about rulemakings with people as they're going on. We have a lot of conversations about that. I think, especially with high-profile, tricky technical issues, it's important to have those conversations. I'm happy where we ended up. I'm hoping that I will be happy where we end up on DERs when we end up there. But I think having the stakeholder conversations, and frankly, having a willingness to say, we had a rule that had two parts. One part's ready, let's move that forward. This one's not, let's wait. I think that was an important decision that FERC made. I think we could have made a lot of different decisions. We could have decided to go forward with both parts of the rule, even if we weren't certain that DERs were ready. We could have said, wait, let's hold off on both parts of the rule until DER is ready. I'm pretty pleased with our ability to say, no, let's move forward on one and continue conversations with the other. But we'll have to see where we end up in terms of when we get the compliance filings. Unfortunately, under FERC's rules, we now can't talk about the storage compliance filings, but I hope I end up pleased where we end up there too.
Hi, my name is Alex Bancourt, and I'm representing Smart Grid Canada. And so I worked with a lot of utilities on the distribution side who dealt with those DERs and those storage companies. And for them, they currently, based on the grid connection rules, sort of treat them the same as DERs. And I know there's many storage companies in the room who sort of think that's unfair because they are different. And I know your work has sort of pointed to, these 100 kilowatt and above energy storage resources on the distribution side should be treated as market participants. Did you delve into that sort of rules around grid connection of those distribution connected energy storage devices to see if the rules need to be different between them?
So grid connection on the distribution level is a state issue, but it is something that has been highly commented on in our DER proceeding, is how to deal with that level of interconnection, particularly for the smaller set of storage. Can be a DER, right? A storage facility under 100 kilowatts will, assuming we go forward with our proposal, would be able to participate as an aggregation. And so those issues are state level. We are having a lot of conversations about the interconnection issues, especially on the DER side, because we got a lot of comments on that. So, yeah. Anything else? Well, I thank you for being here. I really look forward to the conversation. I enjoyed the report that's being discussed today. I look forward to learning from you, and hopefully we can learn from each other. I appreciate it, and I hope you can use your break to go out and see the Raptors parade. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy, for sharing FERC's experience with enabling DERs and storage to participate in the markets. I know in Ontario, many of us are closely following Order 841, and we appreciate your perspective, so thank you. So it is time for a break. We will be reconvening at 10:40. I know that the Raptors parade is upstairs, and for those of you who are interested in timing, I believe they're going to be above us around noon. So if you're trying to catch some action, I think that's when you're going to have it upstairs. But pop in and out as you need, and we're going to be reconvening at 10:40. Thank you.